The fog over Chesapeake Bay clung to the water like smoke as Daniel Brooks stepped onto the rotting deck of his $5,000 houseboat. Beneath his boots, the boards groaned and leaked cold river water. Beside him, Ranger, his 4-year-old German shepherd, circled one spot, growling low. Alert, tense, focused. Daniel tapped the plank. A hollow echo answered. The dog's ears shot up. Something was hidden down there, and something the river had buried and Ranger had just found. When the boat shifted with the tide, Daniel felt it, that sinking certainty that this fresh start was about to uncover something far more dangerous than rot and water. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. The morning fog draped over the Chesapeake like a heavy shroud, muffling the cries of gulls and softening the gray outlines of the anchored boats. Daniel Brooks stood on the dock, his breath curling in the chill as he studied the crooked silhouette of his new home, a weather-beaten houseboat he'd bought for $5 from a man who couldn't meet his eyes. Daniel was 44, tall but slightly stooped from old injuries. His face carried the geometry of long service, a square jaw marred by a thin scar running from his left cheek to the edge of his beard, crow's feet carved by sand, sun, and sorrow. His hair was peppered with gray, and his eyes, blue, distant, perpetually alert, had that soldier's vacancy that comes from watching too many things die. He'd spent most of his adult life underwater, a Navy demolition diver trained to dismantle explosives in blackness. Now he found himself dismantling his own memories one quiet morning at a time. He ran a hand along the railing, the wood flaked under his touch like old paint on bone. $5,000, he muttered, half amused, half bitter. The wind carried his voice away. Beside him, Ranger, his German shepherd, paced with the silent precision of a soldier on patrol. 4 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, the dog's black and tan coat shimmered with morning dew. His amber eyes, intelligent and restless, flicked between Daniel and the deck. Ranger had been rescued from a Portland shelter 2 years ago, a place that smelled of bleach and despair. The dog had once belonged to a military K-9 unit, his handler killed overseas, and when Daniel first saw him, chained and trembling, something in both of them had recognized the same damage. Now, Ranger pressed his nose against a section of the starboard deck and gave a soft, uncertain growl. Daniel frowned, crouching beside him. The wood here looked slightly newer, smoother grain, different nails. When he tapped it, it echoed differently. Hollow. He brushed it off. "We'll deal with that later," he said, though the unease lingered. The marina at Annapolis Harbor was a place forgotten by time, a labyrinth of cracked piers and rusted cleats, where ex-fishermen and drifters turned their boats into homes. The air always smelled faintly of diesel and wet rope. Above the dock sat a small shack with a faded sign that read, "Harold's Marina Office, Cash Only." Inside sat Harold Pike, the owner and self-proclaimed caretaker of this floating graveyard. Harold was in his late 60s, his body a map of injuries that never fully healed. His right leg dragged slightly, a souvenir from a landmine in Vietnam, and his hands trembled just enough to make rolling cigarettes an act of patience. He had the leathery face of a man who'd worked too long in salt and sun, and his eyes, small, pale, and surprisingly sharp, noticed everything. "Brooks, right?" Harold rasped when Daniel entered to sign his rental. "Papers." "The diver," Daniel nodded. "Retired, trying to stay that way." Harold gave a half smile, one corner of his mouth rising slower than the other. "Retirement's just a slower kind of drowning, son. You'll find that out soon enough." He handed over a ring of tarnished keys. "Slip 17. Keep your noise down, pay in cash, and don't ask about the neighbors. You'll get along fine." Outside, the fog was thickening, and the first gulls had started circling overhead. Daniel returned to the houseboat, his boots thudding softly against the wooden dock. Ranger followed close, his ears twitching with every sound. The groan of rope, the slap of water, the faint cough of an unseen engine. By noon, a small figure appeared at the edge of the pier. Jordan Rivera, 12 years old and far too confident for his size. He wore a faded hoodie 2 sizes too big, patched jeans, and sneakers whose soles flapped when he walked. His skin was olive-toned, his dark hair messy in the wind. Jordan had been born around the docks. His father ran the tiny bait shop near the fuel station, and he'd learned early that grown-ups lied more often than the tide changed. "You the new guy?" he asked, holding a fishing rod like a staff. Daniel looked up from the coil of rope he was untangling. Looks that way. Boat's a wreck, Jordan said matter-of-factly. Hope you didn't pay more than $5,000 for it. Daniel chuckled under his breath. 5 exactly. You're good. Then you got robbed, the boy said with a grin, and Ranger's ears perked up. Jordan took a cautious step back. He bite? Only when he has to, Daniel said. He's a better judge of character than me. Jordan shrugged, his grin widening. Guess I'll have to earn his trust then. That made Daniel smile for the first time that day. Start by bringing coffee tomorrow. I'm out. Deal, the boy said, and jogged off toward the bait shop. As the afternoon stretched into gold, Daniel sat on the deck looking across the water. The houseboat swayed gently, and he felt, for the first time in years, something almost like peace. But Ranger refused to relax. The dog kept circling that same section of deck, whining softly, pawing at the boards. Easy, boy, Daniel murmured. We're done with danger. But Ranger wasn't listening. His body was tense, head low, ears forward, every muscle alive with warning. When Daniel finally pressed his palm against the planks again, he felt it too. A faint vibration, like a heartbeat deep inside the hull. Later that evening, Daniel met Brooke Taylor on the dock. She appeared out of the fog like a figure from a photograph, tall, poised, mid-30s, with shoulder-length chestnut hair and a camera slung around her neck. She wore a khaki jacket with press badges pinned inside the lapel and boots too new for dock work. You must be the Navy diver, she said with a warm, measured tone. Brooke Taylor, Baywatch Environmental. I'm doing a story about water pollution around the Chesapeake. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Pollution's the least of our problems here. She smiled politely, not missing the edge in his voice. Maybe you'll let me interview you sometime. People like hearing from veterans. Give stories weight. He nodded slowly. Maybe, when I've patched the holes. As she walked away, her boots echoed against the dock. Ranger's gaze followed her until she vanished into the fog, tail stiff, a low growl simmering in his throat. Daniel frowned, brushing his dog's neck. You don't like reporters either, huh? That night, the fog thickened until even the dock lights looked like ghosts. Daniel lay on the bunk, listening to the soft lap of water against the hull. Ranger slept near the door, breathing steady but alert. The faint creak of the floorboards made Daniel sit up. For a second, he thought he heard something, not water, not wind, a dull metallic thump from under the deck, exactly where Ranger had been pawing all day. He got up, barefoot, and pressed his ear to the floor. The sound came again, a hollow knock, deep and deliberate. Ranger was already awake, standing rigid, teeth bared toward the boards. Daniel whispered, "What the hell?" and reached for his flashlight. The beam cut through the fog outside, catching the movement of ripples against the hull, as if something beneath the water had just brushed against it. And then, in the suffocating quiet, the knocking came a third time, slow, steady, and from inside the boat. The knock came again just after dawn, softer this time, like a heartbeat pressed through wood. Daniel Brooks had barely slept. The night fog clung to the houseboat's windows, turning the inside world to gray haze. Ranger hadn't moved from his post by the deck all night, ears sharp, eyes fixed, muscles taut as if waiting for an order that hadn't come. Daniel rubbed the sleep from his eyes, grabbed his old Navy flashlight, and crouched beside the same patch of floor the dog had been guarding. He tapped it with a wrench. The echo was unmistakably hollow. "All right, partner," he muttered. "Let's see what you're trying to tell me." Ranger's tail thudded once against the floor, an impatient signal. Daniel pried at the edges with a screwdriver, careful not to crack the brittle planks. The wood came loose in thin curls of splintered pine, revealing a faint seam, too precise to be accidental. His heartbeat quickened. Underneath, a faint metal glint caught the beam of his flashlight. He fetched a crowbar from his toolbox, the same one he'd carried through half the world's oceans, and worked the board loose. Beneath it, he found a rectangular hatch, sealed tight with marine-grade bolts, clean of corrosion. The craftsmanship was professional, military even. He wiped the sweat from his brow despite the cold. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide whatever was down there. As he loosened the final bolt, a sharp chemical scent rose, diesel mixed with something sharper, acrid, unmistakably explosive. Ranger whined softly, nose twitching. "Yeah," Daniel whispered. "I smell it too." He opened the hatch and the metallic creak echoed through the cabin. Inside sat a waterproof container, gray, heavy, with stenciled letters reading USCG Evidence Property. His pulse jumped. "You've got to be kidding me," he said under his breath. The box was about the size of a briefcase, sealed with tamper-proof locks and a serial tag. Every instinct told him not to touch it. Every part of his training told him he already had. By the time the sun broke through the fog, Daniel was sitting at the small galley table, the box between him and Ranger. The dog sat still, head cocked, waiting for a command. "I spent 25 years blowing up things the government wanted gone," Daniel said quietly. "And now the damn government's secrets are sitting on my table." The deck creaked outside. Daniel's hand went to the revolver on his belt. A moment later, a knock came at the door. Two short, one long. He opened it slowly. Harold Pike stood there, his lined face caught in the silver light. The old man carried a thermos in one hand and a newspaper under the other. "Morning," Harold said, voice gravelly. "You look like you saw a ghost." Daniel forced a smile. "Just a long night." Harold's eyes dropped to the open planks on the deck, then to the toolbox, then back to Daniel. He didn't ask questions, but his silence did. "You hear about that wreck off Norfolk?" he said, holding up the paper. "Coast Guard lost a container 3 months back during a storm, said it was nothing hazardous." Daniel's grip tightened. "You believe that?" Harold's shrug was small, but his eyes flicked toward the river. "I stopped believing official stories about 50 years ago." He handed Daniel the paper and turned to leave. "Careful, son. The river buries more than bodies." After he left, Daniel read the article twice. A missing evidence container, classified, part of a drug enforcement operation gone wrong. No recovery, no explanation, and now one sat beneath his floorboards. By afternoon, Daniel was on the dock, replacing the boards. The wind had shifted, colder now. That was when he noticed the black SUV parked on the access road beyond the fuel pumps. Its windows were too dark for the overcast day. It idled there for several minutes before pulling away. Jordan Rivera showed up around 3, balancing a plastic cup of coffee and a cinnamon roll in his hands. "Told you I'd bring caffeine," he said proudly. His hair was wind-tossed, cheeks pink from the cold. Then he noticed Daniel staring toward the road. "That the same black car from yesterday?" Daniel frowned. "You've seen it before?" "Twice," Jordan said. "Guys said they were looking to rent a slip. Didn't ask about boats, though. Just asked who lives here." He hesitated, watching Ranger sniffing the dock. "They don't look like boat people." Daniel crouched, resting a hand on the dog's back. "No, they don't." That evening, Daniel took precautions. He installed motion sensors along the dock and placed a mirror outside the door to catch reflections. Old habits from a life he thought he'd buried came back too easily. Silent steps, scanning horizons, thinking 3 moves ahead. Rangers shadowed him everywhere, silent but watchful. When darkness fell, a new sound broke the rhythm of the night, a faint hum overhead. Daniel stepped outside, eyes searching the fog. A drone, small, silent, its red light blinking faintly, hovered near the slip, then drifted away toward the trees. He went to Harold's office the next morning, carrying the newspaper under his arm. The old man looked up from his desk, his face unreadable. "You ever hear of a man named Morrison?" Daniel asked. Harold froze just a fraction too long. "Patrick Morrison?" he said finally. "Yeah, he owned that boat before you. Disappeared last spring. Told people he was heading for Florida, but he never got that far." "What was he like?" "Quiet, kept to himself. Had money once, from what I heard. Lost it gambling, drinking. Nice enough fella." Harold's voice lowered. "You asking because you found something?" Daniel met his gaze. "Just a few loose boards." Harold studied him for a long moment, then exhaled through his nose. "Loose boards sink boats," he said, and poured himself another cup of coffee. Back on the deck, Daniel found Ranger pacing again, head low, body tense. "What is it now?" he asked. The dog stopped, ears flicking toward the far dock where a lone woman was standing, her face half hidden by the brim of a cap. Brooke Taylor. She raised a hand in greeting before walking toward them. "Morning again," she said, smiling. She wore a green field jacket and jeans tucked into worn leather boots. The smell of coffee and rain clung to her. Hope I'm not intruding. Thought I'd grab a few shots of the marina at sunrise. Not much to see, Daniel said, masking his unease. Sometimes the quiet places hide the best stories, she said softly, adjusting her camera lens. Ever feel like this whole bay is keeping a secret? Daniel felt the muscles in his neck tighten. Every bay I've ever known is. Her smile flickered, just for an instant, then she turned the camera toward the water. If you ever decide to tell me yours, she said, I'd buy you dinner first. She walked away, boots clicking lightly against the dock. Ranger watched her go, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Daniel followed her with his eyes until the fog swallowed her completely. That night, Daniel couldn't shake the sense that the boat itself was watching him. The walls creaked with the tide, and every splash of water sounded deliberate. He sat by the small porthole, revolver on the table, the evidence box hidden again beneath the deck. Ranger rested his head on Daniel's knee, eyes half open. Maybe we should have left it there, Daniel whispered. Maybe some secrets are meant to stay buried. Ranger gave a low, almost human sigh, and then his head snapped up, ears pricked. Outside, the reflection of headlights glided across the dark water, stopping at the edge of the pier. Someone had returned. The fog rolled in before sunrise, thick as milk and twice as suffocating. Daniel Brooks woke to the groan of the river pressing against the hull and the uneasy stillness that comes before danger. Ranger stood at the cabin door, tail stiff, ears rigid, staring into the gray beyond the window. The dog's breath misted against the glass like ghost writing. Somewhere beyond that veil, an engine idled, low, distant, deliberate. Daniel reached instinctively for his revolver. His gut told him the watchers from the black SUV had returned, this time not to watch. He slipped into his jacket, checked the latch on the evidence box, and whispered, "Stay close." Ranger gave a low rumble of agreement. The sound of a small motorboat cut through the fog, then another. Soon, the marina's silence fractured under the rhythm of approaching engines. Daniel peeked out the porthole and saw shadows moving across the dock. 4, maybe 5 figures, their outlines distorted by mist. The glint of metal confirmed what he feared. Rifles. Then a voice called out from the fog, calm, firm, and painfully familiar. "Daniel, step out where we can see you." Brooke Taylor emerged first, her field jacket replaced by a tactical vest. Her chestnut hair was pulled tight, her expression carved from steel. The camera that once hung from her neck was gone. Now she held a suppressed sidearm and wore a radio earpiece. The woman who had smiled softly days ago had been an illusion. "You lied," Daniel said, his voice cold. "I told half the truth," she replied. "I'm investigating the river, just not for pollution." She gestured, and 2 men in black stepped forward. The first was Cole Tanner, a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s with cropped blonde hair and a jagged scar running from his temple to the corner of his mouth. He had the posture of a soldier, long disillusioned with orders, a mercenary who'd learned to sell his skills to whoever paid best. The second was Miguel Reyes, shorter but wiry, his dark skin and sharp eyes betraying a predator's patience. He handled his rifle like it was an extension of his body. Both moved with a precision that told Daniel they were professionals. Brooke took a step closer, her boots silent on the damp wood. "You were chosen, Daniel. A retired diver with debts and no family, someone who could find the container and disappear afterward. You were the perfect asset." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Perfect sucker, you mean?" Her jaw tightened. "You have something that doesn't belong to you. Hand over the case, and I'll let you live." From behind her, another voice interrupted. Rough, older, carrying regret like a second skin. "That's enough, Brooke." Harold Pike limped out of the fog, his coat unbuttoned, the familiar thermos still clutched in his trembling hand. His face looked paler than usual, eyes flicking between Daniel and the armed men. "Harold," Daniel said slowly, "you knew." The old man's silence said everything. He looked exhausted, like a man dragged too far down a path he hadn't meant to walk. "I didn't want this, son. But once you found that box, there was no putting it back." Brooke turned to him, voice sharp. "Don't play the martyr. You brought him here because I told you to. Now finish the job." But Harold didn't move. Instead, he pressed a hand inside his coat pocket. Daniel caught the faint metallic outline and understood. Harold wasn't reaching for a gun. He was reaching for the fog siren. A second later, the ancient horn erupted across the bay, a deep, haunting wail that shattered the morning stillness. The mercenaries flinched, covering their ears as their radios crackled into chaos. Brooke screamed orders, but her voice drowned under the blast. "Now, Ranger!" Daniel shouted. The dog lunged forward, barking furiously as Daniel spun the throttle on the old boat engine. It coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. The houseboat jerked forward, breaking free from the dock with a violent pull. Bullets splintered the railing, wood chips flying. Brooke's shout echoed through the fog, furious and muffled by the siren. Ranger stayed low beside Daniel as the boat surged into the channel. The fog swallowed them whole. Behind, voices faded into static. The escape lasted barely 5 minutes before the engine began to smoke. Daniel slammed the throttle down, cursing under his breath. The old motor had never been built for speed, and now it was paying for the abuse. The smell of burning oil filled the air. The boat hit a sandbar with a bone-jarring crash. Daniel's head slammed against the wheel, stars flashing in his vision. Ranger barked frantically, claws scraping the deck. The engine coughed one last time and died. Daniel staggered up, wiping blood from his temple. The bay around them was a gray void. He could hear engines closing in again, fainter but growing. He grabbed the evidence case, slung it across his chest with a strap, and met Ranger's eyes. "Time to swim, buddy." Without hesitation, the dog leapt first, plunging into the icy water. Daniel followed, gasping as the cold bit into his lungs. He held onto Ranger's harness, kicking hard toward the faint outline of reeds along the shore. The sound of pursuit faded, swallowed by the relentless fog. When he finally dragged himself onto the muddy bank, soaked and trembling, Ranger was already scanning the tree line. Daniel could still hear the distant echo of the foghorn rolling over the bay, a cry of warning, or maybe atonement. He turned back once, seeing the faint silhouette of his burning boat collapsing into the mist. Somewhere behind that curtain of smoke and river, Brooke Taylor was still alive, and Daniel knew she wouldn't stop until the evidence and he were both erased from the water's memory. The sound of gunfire cracked across the water like lightning splitting the fog. Jordan Rivera froze for only a second before instinct took over. His heart hammered as he sprinted along the dock toward Harold's workshop, the small tin building trembling with each echo of gunshots. Inside, the smell of oil and rust filled his nose. He yanked the tarp off Harold's old kayak, shoved it into the water, and jumped in. The paddle felt enormous in his small hands. The boy had grown up on these waters. He knew every current, every trick of the tide. If Daniel was out there, he wasn't dying alone. Jordan's breath came fast as he sliced through the mist, steering toward the faint sound of engines in the distance. He pulled the radio from the emergency kit Harold kept in a locker, his fingers shaking. The signal light blinked red, manual transmission only. He pressed the button and shouted, "Mayday, this is Riverside Marina, armed men in the marsh, coordinates, Cape Charles sector." The radio hissed back, no voice, but the signal went through. Somewhere, someone was listening. Meanwhile, Daniel Brooks was half submerged in freezing swamp water, his body aching from the crash. He clutched the evidence case tight against his chest as Ranger swam ahead, cutting a path through the reeds. Every step was a battle. The mud sucked at his boots, cold water creeping higher up his waist. The smell of sulfur and decay stung his nose. Above, the faint buzz of a drone sliced through the air. Ranger stopped suddenly, ears twitching. Daniel crouched low behind a tangle of cypress roots. A red beam flicked across the water, infrared sweep. He held his breath. Ranger didn't move, muscles locked in perfect stillness. The beam passed, and the drone drifted farther east. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Good boy," he whispered. "Let's move." On the other side of the marsh, Brooke Taylor stood on a raised section of rotted boardwalk, eyes narrowed against the fog. Her tactical vest was splattered with mud, hair clinging to her face. The charm of the journalist was gone. What remained was cold precision. "They're heading for the North Inlet," she said into her radio. "Cut them off. Tanner, take your team wide. Reyes, stay with me." Her voice was calm but sharp, every syllable cutting through static. Cole Tanner and Miguel Reyes moved like ghosts through the cattails. Cole's scarred face glistened with sweat. He was breathing hard, but his aim was steady. "You sure he won't dump the case?" he muttered. "He's a soldier," Brooke replied. "They never dump orders, even when it kills them." Back near the inlet, Daniel stumbled onto the remains of a wooden path half swallowed by the swamp. The planks were slick with moss, creaking under his weight. Ranger paused, growling low. Daniel followed his gaze and froze. A figure stood ahead, half hidden in the mist. Harold Pike. The old man's face looked hollowed out by guilt. Gray coat was soaked, his limp worse than ever. He held a portable fog siren, old metal, patched together with wire and duct tape. "You need to move, son," Harold called. "They're closing in." Daniel stepped forward, disbelief and anger mixing in his voice. "You betrayed me, Harold." Harold's eyes glistened. "I tried to stop it before it got this far. But you've got something they'll kill the world to bury. That box. Don't lose it." Behind him, Brooks' team emerged from the reeds, rifles raised. Brooke herself stepped onto the boardwalk, pistol drawn, eyes blazing. "End of the line, Brooks. Hand over the case." Daniel tightened his grip on the strap. "You'll have to take it." Harold lifted the siren with both trembling hands and slammed his thumb on the switch. The blast that followed was deafening. A thunderous howl tore through the marsh, vibrating the water itself. Birds exploded from the trees, and Brooks' men clutched their ears as the sound shredded their radios. "Run!" Harold shouted. Daniel pulled Jordan's voice from his mind, the radio call, the promise of help. He turned and ran with Ranger at his heels. Behind them, Harold stood defiant, the siren screaming in his arms. Brooks' pistol flashed twice. Harold stumbled but didn't fall. He hit the siren again, doubling the frequency. The ground seemed to shake. Then the third shot dropped him. The old man collapsed backward, the siren still wailing beside him. Ranger barked furiously as Daniel dragged himself through the reeds, his chest tight, lungs burning. Somewhere far off, the hum of engines answered the siren's cry. A fleet of boats cutting through the fog. The Coast Guard. Brooke turned toward the sound, her expression hardening. "Fall back, ho," she snapped. But before she could move, Ranger came out of nowhere, a blur of fur and fury. The German shepherd slammed into her side, teeth sinking into her arm. She screamed, firing wildly into the air. Daniel lunged forward, kicking the gun away and pinning her to the ground. "Why?" he demanded. "Who are you working for?" She spat mud and blood, eyes full of hate. "You think this ends with me?" she hissed. "You have no idea what you've started." The roar of engines drowned her words. Spotlights cut through the mist. "U.S. Coast Guard, drop your weapons!" Cole Tanner tried to run. Reyes opened fire, hitting nothing but fog before a spotlight beam caught him. The chaos lasted less than a minute. Then it was over. Brooke lay cuffed in the mud, her eyes burning holes through Daniel. Harold's siren died with a final groan, leaving only the hum of rescue boats. Daniel looked down at Harold's still body, the fog curling around it like a shroud. He placed his hand on the man's chest for a moment, then turned toward the lights of the Coast Guard boats approaching through the mist. Ranger sat beside him, ears low, eyes fixed on the horizon. The evidence case was still strapped to Daniel's chest, heavier now than ever, not from its contents, but from what they had cost. The morning fog over Chesapeake Bay carried a softer tone now, no longer a cloak for danger, but a whisper of memory. Months had passed since the gunfire and sirens. The marsh where Harold Pike had fallen was quiet again, reeds swaying gently where the water had turned red that night. A new sound lived there now, the low, mournful call of a rebuilt foghorn mounted on a steel pole beside a bronze plaque. The inscription read, "In memory of Harold Pike, who found redemption in the sound of courage." Daniel Brooks stood before it, shoulders broader from months of labor, the salt air etching new lines into his weathered face. His hair had gone more silver, his beard fuller, but his eyes, blue, calm, and clear again, had regained something they'd lost long ago: peace. He was no longer the haunted diver scraping for rent, but the founder of the Stillwater Workshop, a veteran-run salvage yard built on the old marina's ruins. He'd used the government reward and the gratitude of federal agents who owed him their careers to rebuild the dock into a haven for men and women like him, veterans who'd survived war but not what came after. They came in all forms: rough mechanics, quiet welders, broken souls learning how to live again. The workshop's motto, carved into a wooden sign at the entrance, read, "Fix what's broken, start with yourself." Ranger had changed too. Once a combat-honed sentinel, the 4-year-old German shepherd had become the heart of the place. His coat gleamed in the sun, and his presence had a strange magic over the veterans. When panic struck or memories came clawing back, Ranger would sit beside the trembling men, pressing his weight against their legs until the shaking stopped. He didn't bark much anymore. He didn't need to. His calm was its own language. Jordan Rivera, now 14, worked beside Daniel every day. He'd shot up in height, but still had the same sharp eyes and restless curiosity. He wore coveralls dusted with sawdust, a wrench tucked into one pocket. The boy had started night classes in marine engineering, and when he smiled, Daniel saw both the child he'd saved and the man he was becoming. They rarely spoke of the night in the marsh, but both carried its lessons in silence. One afternoon, while repairing an old wooden skiff donated by the Coast Guard, Jordan asked, "Do you ever miss it? The Navy, the missions, the danger?" Daniel tightened a bolt before answering. "No, I miss the purpose, but I found a new one here." In the distance, the rebuilt foghorn gave its long, hollow cry. Daniel looked up at the sound, then toward the bay. "Harold would have liked that," he said softly. The government investigation had spread like wildfire. The evidence box he'd protected exposed a web of corruption stretching from New Orleans to Baltimore. Dozens of arrests followed, smugglers, judges, even Coast Guard officers. Brooke Taylor had vanished before her trial, slipping through custody in a storm off Norfolk. Some said she drowned, others whispered she was still out there. Daniel didn't care. The ghosts that mattered were already gone. On weekends, the workshop opened to the public as a small maritime museum. Veterans taught children how to tie knots, patch sails, and listen for changes in the wind. The place smelled of cedar and oil and seaweed, a living memory of the bay. As twilight fell, Daniel stood with Jordan and Ranger on the dock. Mist curled over the water, the air cool and still. The boy stared at the horizon and asked quietly, "Do you think the old boat forgave us?" Daniel smiled faintly, watching the fog drift apart like breath leaving a tired soul. "It didn't need to," he said. "It gave us a second chance." Ranger exhaled beside him, a deep, contented sigh that rolled with the rhythm of the tide, a prayer only the sea could answer. When Daniel stood on the dock that evening, with the foghorn moaning over Chesapeake Bay and Ranger resting by his side, it felt as though the world itself had paused to listen. He'd lost comrades, seen betrayal, and nearly drowned in his own despair. Yet somehow grace had found him. Not through fortune, but through quiet persistence and the mysterious hand of God working in small, unseen ways. The broken boat that nearly killed him became the vessel that carried him back to purpose. The storm that took everything also delivered his redemption. Maybe that's the miracle, not in grand gestures or flashes of divine light, but in the still, stubborn hope that survives the dark. The same hope that lives in every person who refuses to give up, even when the waters rise. If you've ever faced loss, loneliness, or felt forgotten by life's tide, remember Daniel's story. God's grace often hides in the cracks of broken things. Sometimes it takes being lost in the fog to see the light waiting on the shore. May God bless every viewer watching this story. May He heal the wounded, guide the lost, and remind each heart that it is never too late to begin again. If this story touched you, please like, share, and comment below about a moment when faith, kindness, or courage changed your life. Don't forget to subscribe, not just for more stories like this, but to keep alive the message that miracles still happen, often in the quietest corners of the world. And the next time you hear a foghorn in the distance, let it remind you, redemption is always calling.